The telegram arrived at Sheriff Buck Crawford's office on a Tuesday morning in March 1908, and the words made his coffee go cold in his cup. 3 dead. More missing. Come now. Hollister Ridge. No signature. Just those 8 words that would haunt him until the day he died, 30 years later. I've spent 15 years researching unsolved Appalachian cases, and this one stands apart. Not because of the body count, though that was substantial, but because of what Sheriff Crawford found when he climbed that mountain, or more accurately, what he refused to put in his official report. The thing about mountain communities in 1908 North Carolina is that they operated on their own logic. The law was something that existed down in the valleys, in towns with proper streets and telegraph offices. Up in the ridges, families had been settling disputes their own way since before the Revolution. So when a telegram came from Hollister Ridge, a settlement so remote it didn't appear on most maps, Crawford knew something had gone catastrophically wrong. He took 2 deputies with him. James Whitmore, a veteran of the Spanish-American War who'd seen his share of death, and a younger man named Peter Coley, who'd only been wearing a badge for 6 months. They rode out that same afternoon, following the ridge trail that climbed through old-growth forest so thick the sunlight barely touched the ground. What strikes me about Crawford's private journals, which his granddaughter finally allowed me to examine in 2019, is how the dread built with every mile. He wrote about the silence first. No birdsong, no rustle of squirrels or deer, just the sound of their horses' hooves on packed earth and the creak of leather saddles. Then the smell hit them. Whitmore recognized it immediately. Death, but not fresh death. Something that had been rotting for days in the March cold. They found the first body half a mile from the settlement proper. A man named Josiah Mercer, 43 years old, father of 5. He was hanging from an oak tree. But here's where it gets strange. The rope around his neck was tied in a bowline knot, the kind sailors use, not the traditional hangman's noose, and his boots were on the wrong feet. That detail bothered Crawford more than the hanging itself, his granddaughter told me. He kept coming back to those boots. Why would a man put his boots on the wrong feet before hanging himself? They cut Mercer down and wrapped him in canvas. The settlement of Hollister Ridge lay just ahead, maybe 20 buildings total, clustered around a central clearing where someone had built a church that had never seen a proper preacher. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, which meant people were still alive up there, but nobody came out to greet them. Crawford called out. His voice echoed off the surrounding peaks and came back to him. He called again. Nothing. Then a door opened on the largest building, the combination general store and meeting house owned by a widow named Constance Hollister, the woman the ridge was named for. But it wasn't Constance who emerged. It was a girl, maybe 9 years old, wearing a dress that was too big for her and covered in what looked like dried blood. "They're in the church," she said. "All of them. But you shouldn't go in there, mister. You really shouldn't." Here's what I find fascinating about trauma responses. Children often process horror through a lens of strange calm. This girl, Crawford later identified her as Sarah Pritchard, delivered this warning with the flat affect of someone commenting on the weather. Whitmore would later tell his wife that the girl's eyes looked ancient, like she'd aged 50 years in a single week. Crawford should have listened to her. The church doors were barred from the outside, which immediately struck him as wrong. You bar doors to keep something in, not out. He could hear movement inside and what sounded like humming. Multiple voices, creating a drone that made his teeth ache. "Open it," he told his deputies. The smell that emerged when they lifted the bar was beyond description. Crawford vomited immediately. Coley, the young deputy, actually fainted. Only Whitmore kept his composure, though his hand went to his revolver and stayed there. 17 people were inside that church, all alive, all humming that same single note. They sat in the pews facing the altar, and they'd been sitting there for what Crawford estimated was at least 4 days based on the state of the building. They'd soiled themselves. Several showed signs of severe dehydration. But they just sat there, humming, staring at the front of the church where someone had hung a mirror. Just an ordinary-looking glass, about 3 feet tall. When Crawford stepped in front of that mirror, the humming stopped. All 17 people turned to look at him simultaneously, and he said later that this was the moment he understood he was dealing with something that fell outside his jurisdiction as a lawman. Their eyes were wrong, not rolled back, not glazed, just wrong in a way he couldn't articulate, even in his private writings. "Get out," one of them said. A woman Crawford recognized as Margaret Yunt, the school teacher. "You're breaking the protection. Ma'am, you need medical attention. All of you do." "The protection," she repeated. "We have to maintain the protection. If we stop, it comes back." Now, I've read hundreds of accounts of mass hysteria, religious fervor, and collective delusion. This wasn't that. Crawford was a skeptical man, a veteran of coal country disputes and mountain feuds, not someone given to flights of fancy. But he wrote that standing in that church, he felt what he called a thickness in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. He asked what they were protecting against. Nobody answered. They just resumed humming. Crawford made the practical decision to start with the basics. He had Whitmore ride back down to fetch the doctor from Miller's Creek, the nearest real town. He sent Coley to search the other buildings for survivors, and he tried to get the people out of that church. They wouldn't move. When he attempted to physically remove Margaret Yunt, she screamed, a sound he described as inhuman, and the others began to wail with her. He backed off. You learn in law enforcement that sometimes you have to adjust your approach. These people believed something utterly, and forcing them would only make things worse. So he went to find Sarah Pritchard, the girl who'd warned him. She was in Constance Hollister's store, eating beans straight from a can with her fingers. Crawford sat down across from her and asked her to tell him everything. "It started with Reverend Michaels," she said. "He came up from Asheville 3 weeks ago. Said he was a traveling preacher. But Mama said there was something wrong about him. She's always been sensitive to wrongness. I should pause here to talk about Appalachian intuition. Outsiders dismiss it as superstition, but I've found it's really just pattern recognition refined over generations. Mountain people learn to read subtle cues, changes in animal behavior, shifts in weather, the way a stranger holds himself. Sarah's mother had picked up on something about this Reverend Michaels, and events proved her right. He preached about mirrors," Sarah continued. "Said mirrors were doorways. Said we were all living in reflection and didn't know it. Most folks thought he was touched in the head, but then Widow Hollister started talking about her dreams." Constance Hollister had been a respected figure on the ridge, a woman who'd buried 3 husbands and outlived most of her children, tough as mountain stone. But after Reverend Michaels arrived, she started having nightmares. She'd wake up screaming about her reflection doing things she wasn't doing, walking around her room at night, speaking with her voice but saying terrible things. She covered all her mirrors, Sarah said, even the little hand mirror her mother gave her, hung cloth over everything that could show a reflection, and she told everyone else to do the same. Some listened, most didn't. This was 1908, and mirrors weren't cheap. You didn't just cover them up because an old widow had bad dreams. Then the deaths started. The first was Thomas Garrett, found in his cabin with his throat cut. Suicide, everyone assumed, except the razor was in his right hand and Thomas was left-handed. His wife had been the one to find him, and she swore she saw him in their bedroom mirror 3 nights later, standing behind her, even though she was alone in the room. The second death was Emily Tosh, age 16, drowned in Blackwater Creek in less than 2 feet of water. The third was both of the Morrison twins, aged 7, found at the bottom of a ravine they knew better than to go near. That's when Reverend Michaels called the congregation, Sarah said. Said we needed to gather in the church for protection. Said the mirror world was bleeding through, and only constant devotion could hold it back. Crawford asked where Reverend Michaels was now. Sarah pointed to the church. He's in there with them? No, sir. He's in the mirror. The way she said it, so matter of fact, so certain, made Crawford's blood run cold. Here's where I need to inject some analysis, because this is where the case splits into 2 possible interpretations. The rationalist view holds that Reverend Michaels was a con man who triggered a mass psychotic episode through charismatic manipulation, possibly aided by ergot poisoning or some other hallucinogen in the community's food supply. The local wheat harvest had been poor that year, and moldy grain can produce powerful psychological effects. But Crawford didn't believe that. And more importantly, what happened next doesn't fit that neat explanation. Coley returned from searching the buildings with a list of the missing. 11 people unaccounted for, including Reverend Michaels himself. Crawford organized a search, and what they found in the root cellar beneath the church made Whitmore, a war veteran, sit down and put his head between his knees. 5 bodies, partially decomposed, arranged in a circle around a mirror propped up in the center. The mirror was different from the one in the church, older, with a tarnished silver frame covered in symbols Crawford didn't recognize. The bodies all showed signs of manual strangulation. But here's the disturbing part. The bruising patterns suggested they'd been strangled by hands larger than any of the suspected victims, and the finger marks went all the way around their necks, as if the killer had impossible reach. The doctor arrived that evening, a pragmatic Scotsman named Douglas McVeigh, who'd seen everything from childbed fever to mine collapses. He examined the people in the church and declared them physically unharmed, but mentally unreachable. It's like talking to sleepwalkers, he said. They're present, but absent, if that makes any sense. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. Crawford made the decision to break the mirror in the church. Every single person in those pews began to scream. The sound was coordinated, inhuman, a perfect note of terror that seemed to vibrate the wooden walls. Crawford dropped the rock he'd been holding and backed away. The screaming stopped instantly. The humming resumed. "For God's sake, leave it alone," Dr. McVeigh said. "Whatever's keeping them docile, we don't want to interrupt it." But Crawford couldn't just leave 17 people sitting in their own filth, humming at a mirror. He was the law. He had a responsibility. So he tried a different approach. He covered the mirror with a blanket. The humming faltered. Then it changed pitch, growing deeper, more resonant. The temperature in the church seemed to drop 20 degrees in seconds. Crawford's breath came out in visible clouds, and the blanket over the mirror began to move. Not like it was falling, like something behind it was pressing against the glass. Whitmore grabbed Crawford and pulled him out of the church. They slammed the doors and replaced the bar, and Crawford stood there in the March twilight, shaking, trying to reconcile what he'd just experienced with his understanding of reality. "We need a priest," Whitmore said, "or someone who deals with this kind of thing. But who do you call when the law of physics seems to be taking a holiday?" Crawford sent a telegram to the state capitol, trying to explain the situation without sounding insane. The response came back: "Maintain quarantine. Specialists en route." That night, sleeping in Constance Hollister's store with Sarah Pritchard curled up in a chair nearby, Crawford heard the humming from the church change again. It became words. He couldn't make out the language. Some of the syllables didn't sound like anything a human throat should produce, but the rhythm was unmistakably that of a prayer or invocation. He got up and looked out the window. The church was glowing, not burning. There were no flames, but emanating a soft, blue-white light that seemed to pulse in time with the chanting. "They're feeding it," Sarah said from her chair. She hadn't been asleep after all. "That's what Reverend Michaels said. Every hour we don't look away, we feed it a little more of ourselves. Eventually, there won't be anything left of us to come back." Come back from where? From the other side of the mirror. Crawford asked her how she'd escaped this fate. She explained that her mother had locked her in the smokehouse when Reverend Michaels called the congregation. Her mother had known something was wrong, had felt it in her bones, and refused to let Sarah attend. When Sarah finally broke out 3 days later, everyone was already in the church, and her mother was one of the 5 bodies in the root cellar. She tried to stop him, Sarah said, her and 4 others. They went down to break the old mirror, the one Reverend Michaels brought with him. But he was waiting, or something wearing his face was waiting. I want to stop here and emphasize something about children and trauma. Sarah Pritchard was 9 years old, had lost her mother in horrific circumstances, and was now the only uncorrupted witness to an event that had devastated her entire community. Yet she was providing clear, consistent testimony. This either speaks to incredible resilience or to the accuracy of her account, that the events were so concrete, so undeniably real, that even a traumatized child couldn't distort them. The specialists arrived the next morning. They weren't what Crawford expected. No priests or scholars. Instead, 3 people who introduced themselves only by first names. William, a man in his 60s with burn scars covering half his face. Clara, a woman who carried a leather satchel full of items Crawford couldn't identify, and someone who preferred to be called Smith, whose gender Crawford admitted he couldn't determine, and didn't think it polite to ask. They listened to his account without interruption. Then, William said something that Crawford would remember verbatim for the rest of his life. "Sheriff, how attached are you to the official explanation?" Crawford said he was more attached to the truth. "Good. Because the official explanation is going to be coal gas. A pocket of toxic fumes from an old mine shaft caused collective hallucinations and several tragic deaths. That's what will go in your report. That's what the newspapers will print. That's what the state will compensate the survivors' families for." And the actual truth? Clara opened her satchel and removed something wrapped in oilcloth. When she unwrapped it, Crawford saw it was a mirror, small, about the size of a book, with a frame that looked like it was made from blackened bone. "The actual truth is that your Reverend Michaels opened a door that should have stayed closed. Mirrors are thin places, Sheriff. The boundary between here and there gets very fragile around reflective surfaces. Most of the time, nothing happens. But sometimes, if you know the right words, perform the right rituals, you can create a crossing point." "Crossing point for what?" "For things that used to be us," Smith said, "or things that want to be us. It's hard to explain. Imagine looking in a mirror and seeing your reflection gain independence, become its own entity. Now imagine it wants to swap places with you." Crawford asked if this was some kind of spiritualist nonsense. William laughed, a bitter sound. "I wish it were, Sheriff. I truly do. But 3 years ago, I watched my reflection burn me while I stood perfectly still. These scars aren't from any fire I was actually in. They're from a fire my reflection set while I was trapped on the other side of a mirror in a Pittsburgh boarding house." The story he told was similar to what happened at Hollister Ridge, just on a smaller scale. A mirror, a ritual, a crossing. William had gotten out, but barely, and only because someone who understood these things had intervened. "We're those people now," Clara said. "We clean up the crossings before they spread. Because they do spread, Sheriff. One mirror infects another. One reflection gets through and helps another get through. Give it time, and you'd have this happening in every home, every shop, every place, with a piece of glass in North Carolina." Crawford asked what they intended to do. "End it," Smith said simply. "One way or another." They spent the day preparing, and Crawford helped despite his misgivings. They painted symbols on the ground around the church, sigils that Smith said would contain whatever came through. They positioned mirrors from the other buildings in a specific pattern, creating what Clara called a reflection trap, and they waited for sunset. "The crossing is strongest at transition times," William explained. "Dawn and dusk, when the light is changing. Whatever your Reverend Michaels let through, it'll be most active when the sun goes down." As twilight approached, the humming from the church intensified. The 17 people inside hadn't eaten or drunk anything in days. Dr. McVeigh said it was medically impossible for them to still be alive, let alone coherent enough to maintain that sustained vocalization. "They're not alive," Clara said. "Not exactly. They're being sustained by what's on the other side. It needs them as anchors. If they die or stop the ritual, the crossing point collapses." "Then why not just let them die?" Whitmore asked. "Because the things on the other side will do anything to prevent that, including coming through to protect their anchors." As the sun touched the horizon, the church doors exploded outward. No, that's not accurate. They didn't explode. They opened smoothly, normally, but with such force that the bar snapped like kindling. And out walked Reverend Michaels. Except it wasn't Reverend Michaels anymore. Couldn't be. The man had been missing for over a week, and this thing looked fresh, healthy, wearing his face like a well-fitted mask. It smiled at Crawford, and the smile was just slightly wrong. Too wide, showing too many teeth, held too long without blinking. "Sheriff Crawford," it said in Michael's voice. "You should have stayed in the valley." William stepped forward, holding up that small bone-framed mirror. "In the name of the first reflection and the last, I bind you to your origin point." The Michaels thing laughed. "You think I'm the first? You think I'm alone?" "Oh, William, yes, I know you. I know the taste of your burning. There are dozens of us now. This crossing has been open for days. We've been coming through one at a time, learning, preparing." That's when Crawford understood the real horror. The 17 people in the church weren't the victims. They were the decoys. While everyone focused on them, other reflections had been emerging, taking the places of the missing 11 people on Coley's list. They'd been walking around the settlement, wearing human faces, learning how to be human. "Where are they?" Crawford demanded. "Oh, Sheriff, they're everywhere. They left this morning, walking down into the valley. By now, they're in Miller's Creek. By tomorrow, Asheville. They'll find mirrors, open new crossings. It's already too late." Clara threw something, a vial of liquid that shattered against the Michaels thing's chest. It screamed, and the sound was like breaking glass amplified 1,000 times. Where the liquid touched, the thing's skin blistered and peeled, revealing not flesh underneath, but something that looked like mercury, constantly shifting and reflecting. "Silver nitrate," Clara said. "Corrupts the reflection. Smith, now!" Smith ran toward the church, carrying something that looked like a large glass sphere. Inside it, Crawford could see swirling light, like captured lightning. Smith hurled it through the church doors, directly at the mirror on the altar. The explosion of light was blinding. Crawford hit the ground, covering his eyes, and heard 17 voices scream in perfect unison. When he could see again, the church was on fire. Real fire this time, spreading fast through the dry wood. The Michaels thing was on its knees, its form destabilizing, flickering between human and something else. "You've killed them," it said. "The anchors. You've killed your own people." "They were already dead," William said. "You just hadn't let them know it yet." The thing lunged at him, but Clara was ready with another vial. This time, the scream was shorter. The Michaels thing collapsed into a puddle of that mercury-like substance, which quickly evaporated into nothing. But the church was fully ablaze now, and 17 people were inside. Crawford ran forward. Whitmore tried to stop him, but he shook the deputy off. He couldn't just let them burn whatever they were. The heat was intense, smoke pouring out the doors, but he could see the pews, see the people still sitting there. They weren't screaming. They weren't trying to escape. They just sat there as the fire consumed them, and on their faces was an expression that Crawford described as relief. Pure, simple relief. Like they'd finally been released from an unbearable burden. William pulled him back before the roof collapsed. They watched the church burn through the night, and in the morning, all that remained were ashes and 17 sets of bones arranged neatly in the pews, still facing where the mirror had been. The cleanup took 3 days. The specialists were thorough. They found the 11 missing people scattered in the woods around the settlement, or rather, they found what was left of them. The reflections had discarded the original bodies like empty shells. Each corpse showed the same strange characteristic. Their eyes were missing, removed cleanly, as if whatever came through had needed to take something essential. Sarah Pritchard was taken to live with an aunt in Tennessee. Crawford visited her once, years later, and she told him she still couldn't look at mirrors. "I see things moving in them," she said. "Things that aren't me. Doctor says it's trauma, but I know what I see." The official report blamed coal gas from an abandoned mine shaft. The state paid compensation. The settlement at Hollister Ridge was abandoned, and within 5 years, the forest had reclaimed it. By 1920, you couldn't even tell people had lived there. But here's what keeps me up at night, what made this case impossible for Sheriff Crawford to truly solve. The Michaels thing said reflections had already left the settlement, that they'd gone down into the valleys and cities, that new crossings had been opened. William, Clara, and Smith disappeared after the incident. Crawford tried to track them down, but it was like they'd never existed. No records, no trail. Just 3 people who showed up, dealt with the impossible, and vanished. Crawford kept investigating, though. His journals document dozens of similar incidents over the next 20 years. Smaller, quieter, but following the same pattern. People acting strangely after acquiring old mirrors. Entire families disappearing. Small towns developing inexplicable mass delusions centered around reflective surfaces. In 1928, he traveled to Pittsburgh and found the boarding house where William claimed to have been burned. The building was still standing, but the room in question had been sealed off. The landlord, a nervous man named Kowalski, claimed that room had been trouble since the previous century. "Tenants complain about the mirror," he said. "Say they see things. I don't rent it no more." Crawford asked to see it. The mirror was still there, covered with a sheet, and when he lifted the sheet, he saw his own reflection. Normal, ordinary. But as he watched, his reflection smiled. And Crawford wasn't smiling. He left that boarding house and never went back. The thing about mirror folklore is that it exists in every culture. In China, they hang mirrors to repel evil spirits. In Jewish tradition, mirrors are covered during mourning. Bloody Mary, Candyman. These legends persist because they tap into something primal, a fear that our reflection might not be entirely under our control. Crawford died in 1938, and his journals were sealed by his family until 2019. When I finally got access to them, I spent 6 months just processing what I was reading. Because if you accept his account as accurate, and I'm increasingly convinced it is, then the implications are terrifying. How many people walking around today aren't entirely the people they appear to be? How many reflections have successfully made the crossing? How do you even test for something like that? I've developed a theory, though I admit it's more instinct than science. Real people have tells, little asymmetries in behavior, moments of genuine spontaneity. They forget things, contradict themselves, change their minds. Reflections, according to Crawford's notes and the statements from the specialists, are too perfect. They maintain their mimicry too consistently. They don't quite understand context or emotion. They just reproduce what they've observed. I started paying attention to people who seemed just slightly off, too smooth in their responses, too consistent in their patterns, and I found more than I wanted to. There's a man in my hometown who's lived there for 15 years, and nobody can quite remember when he arrived. He's friendly, normal, holds down a job, but he never looks in mirrors. I watched him in a store once. He positioned himself to avoid every reflective surface, moving with a precision that suggested practice. I talked to his neighbors. They all agreed he was a good guy. But when I asked for specific stories, specific memories, they couldn't provide any. He was just there, like a piece of furniture you stop noticing. I'm not saying he's definitely a reflection, but I'm not saying he isn't. The real genius of what happened at Hollister Ridge, if you can call something so terrible genius, is that it worked. The reflections got out. They established themselves. And they've been spreading ever since, slowly, carefully, replacing people one at a time. Crawford suspected this. In his final journal entry, written 2 weeks before his death, he wrote, "I've spent 30 years enforcing the law, and I've learned that some cases can't be solved because they never end. They just change form." The mystery at Hollister Ridge didn't conclude when that church burned. It multiplied, and I fear we won't understand the scope of it until it's far too late. He was right to be afraid. I've tried to trace what happened to the specialists, William, Clara, and Smith. The best I can determine is that they were part of a network, people who dealt with crossings and containments, operating in the shadows of official society. Similar groups exist in the folklore of every culture. The men in black of UFO lore, the mystery monks who appear before disasters, the travelers who show up to solve supernatural problems. But that network seems to have largely disappeared by the 1950s. Whether they succeeded in closing most crossings, or whether the crossings won, I can't determine. What I can tell you is that incidents like Hollister Ridge haven't stopped. They've just gotten better at hiding. A family disappears, and the police find evidence of a murder-suicide. A small town develops a shared delusion, and psychiatrists diagnose mass hysteria. Old mirrors cause problems, and people throw them away, unknowingly spreading the contamination. The CDC has a department that tracks unexplained clusters of illness. I've gotten friendly with one of their analysts, and she's shown me data that troubles her. Small towns that periodically experience population anomalies, not disappearances exactly, but subtle shifts. People who are there but seem different. Personality changes attributed to stress or aging, but happening too uniformly, too consistently. She won't say it officially, but she's noticed that these clusters correlate with antique markets, estate sales, and imported mirrors from certain regions of Eastern Europe and Asia. I asked her what the CDC does about this. She laughed, a tired, bitter sound. What can we do? Write a report saying mirrors are gateways for malevolent reflections? We'd lose our funding and our credibility. So we track it, document it, and hope someone else figures out how to stop it. That's the real horror of the Hollister Ridge case. Not that it happened, but that it keeps happening. And we've collectively decided that dealing with it is impossible. So we just don't. Crawford understood this. In one of his journals, he wrote about a conversation with Clara, the specialist. He'd asked her how long this had been going on. "Forever," she said. "Or near enough. The first humans who polished metal and saw their faces looking back. That's when it started. Every advance in mirror-making technology is also an advance in crossing technology. Silver-backed glass was a revolution. They could come through clearer. stay longer. Who knows what modern mirrors allow? So we're just supposed to accept this? Crawford asked. No. We're supposed to fight it. Every crossing we close, every reflection we send back, that's a victory. But it's like fighting the tide, Sheriff. You can push back the water, but it always returns. That metaphor haunts me. Because if reflections are like tides, then Hollister Ridge was just one wave. There have been others before and since, and there will be more to come. I think about Sarah Pritchard, who lived until 1987, never married, and according to her obituary, kept all the mirrors in her house covered with cloth. I think about the 11 people whose bodies were found in the woods, their eyes missing, their identities stolen. I think about the 17 who burned in that church, and whether they knew at the end what had been done to them. Most of all, I think about the reflections who made it out, the ones who walked down into Miller's Creek and beyond. Where are they now? Did they integrate successfully? Are they raising families, holding jobs, voting in elections? Or are they opening new crossings, bringing through more of their kind, slowly replacing us until one day we realize we're the minority in our own world? Crawford couldn't solve this case because it wasn't a case in the traditional sense. It was an invasion, a slow-motion replacement of humanity by something that wears our faces. And the true genius of it is that we can't fight. What we can't acknowledge exists. I'll leave you with this. The next time you look in a mirror, really look. Watch your reflection for a moment. See if it does everything you do, exactly when you do it. See if the timing is perfect, or if there's the slightest delay. And if you see that delay, if you notice your reflection moving just a fraction of a second after you do, don't panic. Don't run. Just back away slowly and cover that mirror, because it's already noticed you noticing. Crawford's last journal entry included a list of rules he'd developed over 30 years of investigating these incidents. 1. Never look into an antique mirror in low light. 2. Never say your full name while looking at your reflection. 3. If you see someone in a mirror who isn't in the room with you, leave immediately. 4. If your reflection waves when you don't, break the mirror and bury the pieces separately. 5. Never, ever look into a mirror at the exact moment of sunset or sunrise. He claimed these rules had saved his life multiple times. I've added my own. 6. If someone you know suddenly becomes more perfect, more consistent, more reliable, more even-tempered, check how they interact with mirrors. 7. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong about a person, even if you can't articulate why, there's probably a reason. The mystery at Hollister Ridge wasn't solved because it can't be solved. It's ongoing. It's around us. And Sheriff Buck Crawford spent the last 30 years of his life knowing this, watching for it, and being powerless to convince anyone else it was real. He was a good man, by all accounts, honest, dedicated, respected by his community. But he died afraid, convinced that humanity was losing a war it didn't know it was fighting. I think he was right. And I think the fact that this case remains largely unknown, buried in the archives of a small county sheriff's office, is exactly what the reflections want. Silence? Dismissal? The comfort of rational explanation, because as long as we don't believe in them, they can keep crossing over, keep replacing us, keep spreading. The telegram that started everything. 3 dead. More missing. Come now. Hollister Ridge. was never traced to a sender. The telegraph operator in Miller's Creek swore nobody had come in to send it. It just appeared on his machine, tapped out by invisible fingers. Crawford believed it was a trap, a lure to get law enforcement involved so the reflections could study them, learn how to avoid detection. If that's true, it worked perfectly. By the time this story is told, it'll be dismissed as folklore, as mountain legend, as the fantasy of a traumatized sheriff who couldn't cope with a tragic mass death. That's fine. That's expected. But for those who know what to look for, the signs are everywhere. Population shifts that don't quite make sense. People who seem familiar but aren't quite right. Towns that have too many old mirrors and too many antique shops. The Appalachian Mountains have always been a thin place where the boundary between worlds grows permeable. The Cherokee knew it. The Scottish and Irish settlers who came later recognized it. And the things on the other side of mirrors have always known it too. Hollister Ridge was just one crossing point among many. It was closed, at great cost, but others remain open, and new ones are being created all the time, whenever someone performs the right ritual with the right mirror and the right intention. Or sometimes, no intention at all. Sometimes a crossing just happens, a random alignment of reflective surfaces and ambient energy. And a reflection gains enough substance to step through. What happens to the original person in those cases? Crawford found evidence suggesting they end up on the other side, trapped in the mirror world, watching as something else lives their life. Some of his informants, people who claimed to have escaped from brief crossings, described it as hell. A world of endless reflection, where nothing is solid, nothing is real, and you're forced to watch your life continue without you. I don't know if I believe in hell as a theological concept, but that description comes close. The Hollister Ridge case file officially remains unsolved, though the official explanation is coal gas. The settlement is gone. The people are dead or scattered. The church burned and was never rebuilt. But the mirrors remain. Some were destroyed by the specialists. Others were buried. A few disappeared, presumably taken by the reflections themselves as they fled. And one, according to Crawford's notes, was never found. The original mirror that Reverend Michaels brought to the settlement, the ornate one with the tarnished silver frame. It wasn't in the root cellar when they cleared the bodies. It wasn't in the church when it burned. It just vanished. Crawford spent years searching for it, following rumors and tips across 3 states. He never found it, but he documented 14 separate incidents, small scale compared to Hollister Ridge, but following the same pattern, that he believed were connected to that missing mirror. Each incident left bodies. Each left survivors who couldn't quite remember what happened. Each left behind the lingering sense that something had fundamentally changed in the affected area. And each incident ended with more missing mirrors, as if the reflections were collecting them, preparing for something larger. I think about that a lot. What would a coordinated crossing look like? What if, instead of one mirror in one settlement, there were hundreds of mirrors in hundreds of locations, all opening simultaneously? Could we even tell if it happened? Would we notice if half the population got replaced overnight with reflections that had been carefully studying us, learning our patterns, perfecting their mimicry? Maybe it's already happened. Maybe the world we're living in now is the post-crossing world, and we just don't realize it yet. That's the thought that kept Sheriff Buck Crawford awake at night for 3 decades. That's the mystery he could never solve. Not because he lacked evidence or intelligence, but because the answer was too terrible to accept. We might already have lost. And if we have, the reflections won by making sure we'd never believe we were fighting a war at all. Sleep well.